What if I told you that the most trustworthy person you know is hiding something from you right at this very moment? Not because they're evil, not because they want to hurt you, but because human nature makes it impossible to be completely honest with any other person. You know that feeling when someone tells you, "Trust me," and something in your stomach tightens? Freud called that your survival instinct working perfectly. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the wisest people in history never fully trusted anyone, and why that didn't make them cynical, it made them free. In fact, you'll discover that absolute trust isn't a virtue, it's dangerous naivety. You walk into a meeting room and see two people. In the first chair sits Maria, your best friend of 10 years, who knows all your secrets, who was there during your darkest moments, who swore to always have your back. In the other chair sits a complete stranger, someone you just met, no history, no promises, no emotional ties. Now imagine you have to trust one of these people with something that could destroy your life if revealed. Who do you trust? If you answered Maria without hesitation, you just fell into the oldest trap in human psychology. Because while Maria knows you deeply and genuinely cares, she also has 10 years of your vulnerabilities stored in her memory. She knows exactly how to destroy you. The stranger doesn't have that information, has no motivation, has no context. Freud discovered something disturbing about intimate relationships. The closer we are to someone, the larger the arsenal we build to potentially hurt each other. Maria might not use that information today, but what about tomorrow? What about when her interests conflict with yours? What about when she's under pressure, scared, or simply changed by time? Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. You judge people who don't trust because it threatens the entire foundation of how you've built your relationships. Your friendship with Maria, your marriage, your business partnerships, all of it is built on a foundation of mutual trust. And if someone comes along and says that foundation is an illusion, that absolute trust is impossible between human beings, then what's left of the emotional structure you spent years building? Freud spent decades studying why people betray each other, why lovers destroy each other, why families fragment. And what he discovered was this: we don't trust each other because we're good. We trust because we need to believe we're not alone in an indifferent universe. Trust isn't based on evidence. It's based on desperate psychological need. But here's what Freud knew that nobody wants to admit. The person who understands that absolute trust is impossible isn't the broken person. They're the awakened person. And that person operates from a completely different level of consciousness. While you're building emotional houses of cards that any breeze can topple, they're building something much stronger, something based on realism, not romantic fantasy about human nature. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you've realized that even the closest people have hidden agendas, this video is for you. Like, subscribe, and leave in the comments the last time you trusted someone and regretted it. Let's flip the script together on everything society taught us about trust. Remember that uncomfortable feeling you get when someone says they don't trust anyone? Freud had a name for it, and once you understand what it is, you'll never see human relationships the same way again. Quick question: when was the last time someone told you the complete truth? Not a version of the truth. Not the truth with convenient omissions. Not the truth filtered through what they think you want to hear. The complete, unvarnished, total truth. You can't remember, can you? That's because it never happened. Freud discovered that our obsession with trust isn't about believing in people. It's about avoiding the terrifying reality that we're fundamentally alone. He called this the ego defense mechanism. The parts of reality we're too terrified to face, so we create comfortable illusions instead. And in our culture, the biggest illusion is that trust between humans is possible or even desirable. But here's what Freud knew that society desperately tries to hide. We perform trust. We declare our loyalty. We make promises and vows and commitments, not because they mean anything permanent, but because we're terrified of facing the truth that every person is ultimately self-interested, and that includes you. Think about your last serious conflict with someone close. Did they prioritize your well-being over theirs? Or did they, when push came to shove, protect themselves first? The person who doesn't trust anyone doesn't have that delusion. And that's what makes them dangerous to a society built on the myth of reliable human connection. They're not performing trust. They're not pretending relationships are permanent. They're not even hoping people will be consistent. And somehow, this is the part that breaks people's brains. They still build meaningful connections, often deeper than those built on blind trust. Freud wrote, "We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love." What irritates you about the person who doesn't trust is that they're not following the social contract you've been forced to follow. That they're not making themselves vulnerable in the ways you've been taught. Vulnerability equals connection. That they're not treating trust like a moral imperative that good people automatically extend. But what if they're not the problem? What if the problem is that you've been lied to your entire life about what trust really means and what it costs? Here's what the relationship experts don't want you to know. Your unconscious mind knows that complete trust is suicide. Every single person you've ever trusted has disappointed you in some way. Think about it. Your parents, who were supposed to be infallible, failed you in ways you're still processing. Your first love, who promised forever, is now a stranger, or worse. Your best friend from childhood, where are they now? But here's what society taught you, that the problem was you chose wrong, that you needed to develop better judgment, that next time you'll find someone truly trustworthy. That's the lie that keeps you trapped. Freud wrote, "One is very crazy when in love. The person who doesn't trust hasn't given up on connection. They've given up on the fantasy. They understand something most people never access. Every human being operates primarily from self-interest. Not sometimes, not in extreme situations, always. This doesn't make humans evil, it makes them human. While you're forcing yourself to ignore red flags because you want to believe in someone's goodness, they're seeing clearly. While you're making excuses for inconsistent behavior because you've invested in the relationship, they're accepting reality. This is why their relationships often work better, not worse. Because they're not expecting people to be what they can't be. They're not disappointed when people act according to their nature. They're not betrayed when self-interest inevitably emerges. Remember Maria from the meeting room? While you were listing all the reasons she'd never betray you, the person who doesn't trust was calculating under what circumstances she would. Not because they're paranoid, because they're realistic. Freud called this reality testing, when your conscious mind stops defending against uncomfortable truths and lets your unconscious present its accurate assessment. But here's the really crazy part. This process feels terrible. It feels cynical. It feels like you're becoming a bad person for even thinking this way. And that's exactly the social conditioning designed to keep you vulnerable, keep you exploitable, keep you extending trust to people who haven't earned it and never will. Now we get to the real reason society fears the person who doesn't trust anyone. And it's not what you think. This isn't about individual relationships. This is about control. Freud wrote, "Most people do not really want freedom because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. But the person who doesn't trust isn't frightened of that responsibility. They've accepted it completely, and that's terrifying to anyone who profits from your dependence on others. Think about it. Our entire social system depends on one belief, that you need other people to survive emotionally. You need family who you can trust. You need friends who will be there. You need a partner who completes you. You need a community that accepts you. Every single institution, from religion to government to corporate culture, is built on manufacturing and exploiting that need. The person who doesn't trust looks at this system and asks one simple question: what if I don't need any of that? And nobody has a good answer. They have self-reliance without loneliness, connections without dependence, relationships without illusions. This makes them unpredictable. Unpredictable people are dangerous to systems that depend on emotional manipulation. But here's the deeper fear that keeps people up at night. What if the person who doesn't trust anyone is right? What if trust isn't the foundation of healthy relationships, but the vulnerability that destroys them? What if the people who demand your trust are the ones most likely to abuse it? What if self-protection isn't selfishness, but wisdom? If that's true, then millions of people have been suffering for nothing. They've been sacrificing their boundaries, their intuition, and their safety for a social expectation that was never designed to serve them. The person who doesn't trust represents proof that there's another way, a way that doesn't require making yourself vulnerable to people who haven't earned it. Freud observed, "The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. The person who doesn't trust is looking at what's below the surface, and what they see there doesn't match what people present above the waterline." But here's where this gets personal, because Freud himself was the perfect example of what happens when society labels someone as too cynical, too untrusting, too dark about human nature. Sigmund Freud was literally the person who didn't trust anyone of his time, and his story proves this. His colleagues thought he was too pessimistic about human nature. The academic world called him cynical and reductive. Society labeled him as brilliant but misanthropic. Freud spent years in what looked like bitter isolation, analyzing human motivations, developing theories that stripped away comforting illusions, writing observations that nobody wanted to hear. Sound familiar? That's exactly what people say about those who don't trust today. But here's what Freud knew that his critics didn't. He had accepted something terrifying, that humans are primarily driven by unconscious self-interest. That civilization is a thin veneer over primal urges. That trust extended naively leads inevitably to exploitation. And from that acceptance came insights that revolutionized how we understand human behavior. The unconscious mind, defense mechanisms, the id and superego, transference and projection. All of these concepts shape how we understand human nature today. They all emerged from what looked like cynicism, but was clear-eyed, unflinching observation of how people actually behave when their interests are threatened. This is the pattern with history's greatest psychological thinkers. They appeared cynical to their contemporaries because they weren't pretending humans were better than they are. Machiavelli called it realistic assessment of human nature. Nietzsche called it going beyond good and evil. Freud called it psychoanalysis. But society called it misanthropy. The person who doesn't trust today is following the same pattern. And just like Freud, they're not waiting for people to become trustworthy. They're not trying to reform human nature or fix people's character. They're building a life that works with humans as they actually are, not as we wish they were. And that realism looks like cynicism to everyone else. Here's what Freud knew that our society is still learning. The person who doesn't trust anyone isn't damaged. They're evolved. They've seen through the most dangerous lie civilization tells, that other people are reliable, that trust is always good, that vulnerability is always strength. And once you see through that lie, you can't unsee it. But maybe you're starting to recognize yourself in this description. Maybe you're wondering if you're one of these people that society has mislabeled as damaged when you're actually just awake. Freud wrote, "Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise, but being honest about trust requires a different kind of courage. Let me show you the signs. If you are someone who has learned not to trust, understanding this will change your entire life." First sign, you test people before trusting them. While others extend trust freely and hope for the best, you watch how people behave when they think you're not looking. You notice inconsistencies between words and actions. You wait to see if someone follows through on small commitments before believing their big promises. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Second sign, you're more hurt by your own misjudgments than by others' betrayals. When someone lets you down, you're not devastated by their behavior. You're frustrated that you miscalculated. You saw the signs and ignored them. You wanted to believe despite evidence. The disappointment is with yourself, not them. Third sign, your relationships have explicit boundaries and implicit exit strategies. You never fully merge your life with anyone. You maintain separate finances, separate social circles, separate parts of yourself. When people call this commitment issues, you call it survival skills. Sound familiar? That's not damage from past trauma. That's wisdom from accurate observation. Fourth sign, you're simultaneously more honest and more private than most people. You'll tell uncomfortable truths others avoid, but you won't share your deepest vulnerabilities with anyone. You've learned that honesty doesn't require exposure, and connection doesn't require giving someone ammunition to hurt you. Fifth sign, you feel relief, not loneliness, when relationships end. While others are devastated by breakups, betrayals, or falling outs, you feel a weight lifted. The exhausting performance of trust is over. You can stop pretending to believe in permanent connection. You're free again. Sixth sign. You respect people more when they act in their self-interest than when they claim to be selfless. When someone admits they're doing something because it benefits them, you trust that statement. When someone claims to be doing something purely for you, you start looking for the hidden angle. Because you know humans don't work that way. Seventh sign. You've been told you have walls up, you're guarded, you don't let people in. And every time you hear this, you think, no, I have appropriate boundaries based on how humans actually behave. You've been taught to see these traits as wounds that need healing. You've been sent to therapy to learn to trust again. Freud would tell you to stop. He'd tell you that your accurate assessment of human nature isn't a disorder, it's clarity. When you stop fighting reality and start working with it, you gain access to something genuine. Not the desperate clinging that people call trust. Not the anxious attachment that masquerades as love. But clear-eyed connection based on what people actually are, not what you need them to be. This is why you're often alone but rarely lonely. When you're not exhausting yourself maintaining illusions about people, you have energy for actual connection with the few who prove themselves through consistent behavior over extended time. This is why your confidence seems cold to others. When you're not basing your worth on whether others approve of you or stay with you, you can see yourself clearly regardless of their opinions. But accepting this truth about yourself, that you fundamentally understand humans can't be fully trusted, that's the hardest part. Now comes the practical question. How do you live as someone who doesn't trust anyone in a world that demands blind faith in human goodness? Freud believed that the goal of therapy was to replace neurotic misery with ordinary unhappiness. But once you accept your realistic view of human nature, you need a strategy for navigating a world built on illusions. First, stop apologizing for your boundaries. Your refusal to trust freely isn't a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism based on accurate observation. When someone demands your trust without earning it, that's manipulation, not connection. When someone calls you damaged for requiring proof through behavior, that's gaslighting, not care. Give yourself permission to require evidence. Protect your boundaries. Defend them against people who claim that real love requires blind trust. Second, learn to recognize the difference between appropriate caution and defensive isolation. Not trusting anyone doesn't mean cutting yourself off from all human connection. It means engaging with eyes open. Caution feels calm, observant, like gathering data. Defensive isolation feels fearful, reactive, like hiding. When you're appropriately cautious, you can still connect with people, you're just not betting your entire well-being on their consistency. When you're defensively isolated, you're punishing yourself for others' potential betrayal. Third, develop what Freud called reality-based relationships. This isn't pessimistic disconnection. It's honest engagement with humans as they actually are. You can care about people while knowing they'll prioritize themselves when it matters. You can enjoy someone's company while maintaining your independence. You can even love someone while understanding that love doesn't make humans trustworthy. But here's the most important part. You have to stop measuring your relationships by society's fantasy standards. The world wants you to have a soulmate who would never hurt you, a best friend who would die for you, a family that always has your back. Social media celebrates grand gestures and declarations of eternal loyalty. But Freud understood something deeper. Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. That exercise includes admitting that those fantasy relationships don't exist. Your relationships might look transactional to others. Your boundaries might seem cold. Your refusal to fully merge with anyone might appear lonely. And that's not failure. That's freedom. Think about it. Every person who didn't trust anyone was told they were missing out on real connection. Freud himself was criticized for his cold assessment of human motivation. His theories seemed too dark for decades, but when his predictions about human behavior proved accurate again and again, everything he'd been quietly observing suddenly became undeniable. His cynicism turned out to be realism. His distrust turned out to be wisdom. His refusal to believe in human goodness turned out to protect him from the disappointments that destroyed more naive observers. The same pattern happens over and over. The person everyone called damaged for not trusting suddenly turns out to be the only one who wasn't blindsided when people revealed their true nature. Because while everyone else was performing trust and hoping for loyalty, They were watching behavior and preparing for inevitable self-interest. Here's what nobody tells you about being someone who doesn't trust anyone. Your clarity will be confirmed, but it won't feel like victory. Let me say it again. Freud wrote, "The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside." You've been looking at the inside while everyone else looks at the outside. You've been seeing reality while they've been believing in performance. And that sight gives you something trust-based relationships can't provide. The ability to connect without dependency, to care without illusion, to engage without vulnerability. But your vindication won't announce itself with fanfare. It won't fit the hero's journey narrative that movies taught us to expect. Instead, it will feel quiet, inevitable, like something you always knew would happen. People will eventually show you who they really are. The masks will slip. The self-interest will emerge. The betrayal you were watching for will manifest. And when that moment comes, all the years of being called damaged will reveal themselves as protection. Every time you refused to trust fully was actually your instinct saving you from destruction others chose. Every boundary you maintained was actually your wisdom preventing the pain others volunteered for. Society fears the person who doesn't trust anyone because they represent a different relationship with human nature, with connection, with vulnerability itself. They prove that maybe the problem isn't damaged people who need to learn to trust. Maybe the problem is a system that pathologizes accurate observation and tries to force everyone to ignore clear evidence about how humans actually behave. If you're someone who has big reservations about trusting others, if your caution seems disconnected from specific trauma, if you've been labeled as damaged despite having clear reasons for your boundaries, Freud would recognize you immediately. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not failing at relationships. You're operating from accurate assessment of human nature that society is not equipped to acknowledge. The question isn't whether you'll ever learn to trust. The question is whether you'll have the courage to maintain your clarity even when everyone tells you it's wrong. Because Freud was right. Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. And sometimes the most honest thing you can admit is that humans, including the ones you care about, cannot be fully trusted. Even when the rest of the world calls that cynicism, the person who doesn't trust anyone isn't society's failure. They're society's truth teller, and that's exactly why they fear them. If this video made you see yourself differently, or if you recognize the person who doesn't trust in your own life, let me know in the comments. What's the last time someone proved to you that your distrust was justified? And if you want more content that challenges everything you think you know about human nature, subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're just getting started with truths that society doesn't want you to hear.